Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. My name is Zandashé Brown, and I am a Louisiana-based filmmaker. I'm also the programming manager and artist development coordinator at the New Orleans Film Society. And I'm joined here by two incredible women, actors, activists, and so much more that we're going to get into in this conversation. Dawn-Lyen Gardner, who plays the role of Charlie Bordelon in the series Queen Sugar, and Tina Lifford, who portrays Violet Bordelon, better known as Aunt Vi. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to be in conversation with both of you. And most of these panels, I mean, the first question that you have to start with is, how are you? This has been a really intense year, and we've all been through so much together and individually, but what has life been like for you since March and lately?
That's a big question. That's a really giant question. Wow. Well, when the pandemic I don't even know if you can actually say it officially started, but when the lockdowns officially started, we were filming. So we were in our second episode, moving right along and hearing rumblings, as most of the world was. And then when we got the call that it was shutting down, it was an interruption. I think that's the best way to describe it for probably throughout the world. It was an interruption. And I think for me, these months have been a real combination, I think fairly defined, if I'm being honest, by grief. I think the pandemic itself was, the interruption of it, I think brought with it a certain kind of grief of a lot of things, definitely lives that were lost and affected, but also the grief of plans, the grief of income that may have been lost for people, the grief of just not knowing, what we thought to be different. And there was a lot of that I felt, but there were also gifts. And I think the gifts that came with it, in terms of the pandemic, were also about the interruption, about pausing and stopping and reflecting, that without which I don't think I would have done, at least not as deeply, and not as, there were some profound things that I think I walked into. And then that grief also met up with the grief of the protests over the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many others. And I think that combination of interruption of planned life and confrontation with the realities of, it's not even just systemic racism, it's I think beyond that, systems that don't work in many ways, and that create suffering and suffering in many ways. I think confronting that was, I've never seen anything like it before now, not in my adult life. And so I feel like this time, and then moving into the election, right? So it's like, it has been nonstop, in my opinion, unprecedented experiences and moments that have brought with it the opportunity and pain of grief, and the reflection of that, and I think possibility that we wouldn't have without this year having gone as it did, as insane and chaotic and painful as it could be at times. So for me, at this moment, I am reflective on all of it, and moving into the holiday season, which is already a time of often deep reflection and celebration, and then moving into a new year with an incoming administration and an election that was giant, that was really only a week and a half ago, but feels like 2 years ago. Like it's an incredibly unprecedented time, and I am actually incredibly grateful for it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's so much to do with grief. I'm glad that that's something that you pointed out. And for Tina, how has it been for you?
Yeah, it's been a time of discovery for me. And it's been a time of deep gratitude and appreciation. You know, there is a difference between, you know, my age and Dawn-Lyen's age. And in that difference, for me, there's lots and lots of what I call practice at living. And what I have learned that I know, this pandemic has taught me what I know, because it has left me experiencing and responding from the places I know. And so discovery is top of my list. You know, I learned long time ago, literally, there was a Taoist parable that I heard years ago, literally maybe 40 years ago, I heard this parable, and it began to shape my life back then. And just in short, you can actually go online and look it up to experience the entire parable. But the parable, it's about, you know, a farmer who is at harvest time and ready to do all the things that they traditionally do around harvest to set themselves up for the coming year. And one thing after another happens, like his horse runs away, and how can you bring in the harvest without the horse? You know, and then his son, and then the horse comes back with 3 wild stallions, you know, and then his son breaks his leg while breaking one of the stallions. So how are you gonna now bring in the harvest without the son? And then, you know, the army comes and they are enlisting all able-bodied young men. And so the farmer's son can't go, and the rest of the neighboring sons have to go, they're enrolled. And the upshot is that if we can take a beat between actually identifying things as bad or good, we get to be with what is. And in the being with what is, we can oftentimes discover things that we never would have imagined were tucked inside of these experiences. And that's been my experience. I have had the opportunity, in the life that I live, I have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with myself. And I say opportunity because I enjoy spending time with myself. But the pandemic has given me the opportunity to spend quality time online in the work of inner fitness that I do. So all of a sudden, my life slowed down enough that I could invite into my living room and into my world these beautiful conversations that support people, you know, who are in the midst of grief, or support people who are in the midst of, you know, trying to breathe and just stay present, or whatever the challenge may be. So the discovery of community, the discovery of, you know, seeing that we are so much more resilient and capable and alive than sometimes we consciously think of ourselves as. Watching all of that is really exciting to me.
This is going to be an incredible conversation, because just so much already from what you both have said is so profound and restorative. And I really want to pour into all of it in this conversation, or as much as we're able to in this next hour. Well, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the significance of Queen Sugar in New Orleans. You know, roughly 5 years ago, when people here learned that this new production was filming in Louisiana, and it wasn't only set and shot within the region, but it utilized so much local talent and would be giving people jobs. And so we were so excited to have this show take place here, and for it to still be going, and everyone know someone who's worked on the show or who's been a part of the show in some way, or maybe they saw Kofi at the store and thought he smiled at them or something, you know? So I'm just curious for the both of you, what has this experience been like shooting these past few years in and around New Orleans as opposed to bigger cities like New York and Los Angeles? I mean, you're certainly at this point, you know, you're not strangers, you're not tourists, you know the city in a very unique way and the state in a unique way. What has it been like?
You want to go first, Tina?
No, I'll just jump in and say that if someone thought that Kofi was smiling at them, he was. he was because he loves this city and he loves the people of New Orleans. So yeah, he was smiling at you. I'll tell you that for me, coming back for season 5, it's definitely logistically a challenge and some days a nightmare. But the thing that I love about it, you see this beautiful face on this Zoom with me, Dawn-Lyen Gardner, and you know, Kofi, and I haven't seen Rutina yet.
She gets here today.
Yeah, she gets here today? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you know, 4.5 years ago, I didn't know these people. And thank God there was no pandemic then. But now I'm back here in New Orleans and I'm with family. And even though this pandemic thing is challenging, it has its challenges, it is lovely to be in an environment that does feel like family, because I absolutely feel that our production team and our executive producers, they care. I actually feel like Warner Brothers cares. You know, I feel like we care about one another. And I haven't seen Dawn-Lyen much, right? But I do know that she's right downstairs, you know? And I get to play with Kofi's dog, Lady. And we get to, you know, every now and again, I wind up on the rooftop in deep, meaningful conversations with people. So that's what this season is for me. And aside from a beautiful storyline that is unfolding, there is the story of family in the midst of a pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what Tina's saying about just the incredible fortune of being with people that you love during this time, it really can't be overstated, in my opinion. And she's absolutely right that almost 5 years ago, I feel like gifts were just dropped into my life that I was not prepared necessarily to experience, because I think as actors, you sort of train yourself, at least I had trained myself to be a bit guarded in professional experiences, to walk onto a new set, not knowing what was happening, but sort of, you know, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, and, you know, often experiencing something in that range, not quite the best, but sometimes a little bit closer to the worst. So it was such a joy. It was just a pure joy to meet and discover how it actually was much closer to the best, especially when it comes to the cast and especially when it comes to how our set feels. It's pretty unparalleled in my experience. So I'm just exceedingly grateful for that. But in terms of the show in New Orleans, and the city itself, I think the show is in its way a love letter to Black people and Black culture. But I think it's also, and has evolved and become even more of a love letter to the city and to the people of New Orleans and the people of Louisiana, not even just New Orleans, right? Because a lot of our show takes place in sort of outside of the city and in the rural parts of Louisiana. So I think, and even in its way, a love letter to the New South, or the now South, as Stacey Abrams says. You know, this changing landscape that is absolutely defined by an unapologetic experience and expression of Blackness that I think we're seeing and celebrating more and more. So I am so grateful to have had this experience, to have essentially shepherded this character, which is much closer to me in terms of being from Los Angeles and being in a place where it's not quite her lens and her home base, but in her way is discovering the beauty of the community that she's now in, and is discovering and thriving from the lessons and meeting herself even more in that experience. So yeah, New Orleans is like, and I think most people feel this way, but it returning year after year and season after season has, and telling the stories that we're telling, which are responding to life and responding to things that are happening in New Orleans and nationally. And this season is no different. You know, Ava has come out and said it's going to be a storyline specific to 2020. So being able to also reflect back Black life and life in the city and life in New Orleans in 2020, and be not quite a time capsule, but definitely its own nod and love letter to, it's something of a bottle season, a nod and love letter to what this has been for us. It just feels like a giant privilege, and I'm missing the city a little bit because we are quarantined in this hotel, so we can't actually, like, it's like watching from the window and being like, oh yeah, that looks like fun, you know, just like.
Or I remember that, you know, walking down magazine, but we're not able to do any of that this season. We literally are stuck in this hotel.
Yeah.
I mean, stuck in this hotel. They've got sentries at every door, you know, and we get picked up for our work call, and we are shuttled to the studio, and then we're shuttled back to the hotel. And that is going to be our New Orleans experience this season. That's it.
Wow. So for anyone watching, do what y'all need to do to assemble some sort of second line outside the window or something. Somebody please bring them some entertainment.
Yeah. I did have a jailbreak though about. What were you saying?
No, go ahead. I was going to say, we can't even go out and get our own food.
No.
You know? No. Our food is brought in, and it's brought in by certain couriers, you know, because thank goodness there is a lot of attention to making sure that we all stay well, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dawn, you were
going to say that I just a few days ago, because I'm basically on a little bit of a hiatus from actual shooting at the moment, but I basically left the hotel for a day. Just went around and just did all the walking that I possibly could do, mostly in nature, because that's where I go to, you know, remember myself. But even that much, it was like, wow, there's so much life that this city lives. Even now, there's just a beating heart. There's a beating heart in New Orleans that is so distinct and beautiful.
And we're so thankful that y'all are a part of it. I mean, you both spoke to the love that's like really emanating from this team, and it's evident, you know, it comes across in the intentions of who's signed on to be directors and writers, of the political stances that are taken, and it's just felt very much so. And we can see that, you know, this team is a family. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about your respective characters, these two characters that you've both lived in for the past few years, Charlie and Aunt Vi, and how their evolution in this story has sort of taken place, as well as your own. I've always been curious, you know, when you carry a character for such a long time with you, how you sort of differentiate yourself and attend to both parties, you know, and just what has that experience been like, portraying your characters for an extended amount of time?
Tina, I want to hear from you first, because you are both a veteran actor, but also a masterful actor and a masterful human in terms of how you live. So I don't think I've ever heard you talk about this. I just want to, I would love to hear you talk first.
Yeah. So a couple of things. We talk about love letters. Aunt Vi is the opportunity to love all the women in our lives who are over 55 and usually don't see themselves as fully rendered human beings on television or on the big screen. Aunt Vi is, I feel so honored to be able to literally represent all the aunties, you know, that would be in our basement when I was growing up, or in the kitchen cooking chitlins and greens, right? Or at the card table, or coming in and serving, you know, food as a card game goes until 3 o'clock in the morning. All of those aunties wiggling their behinds, these are fully alive, rich women. And it wasn't until Queen Sugar that I saw these women. And so, you know, rendered on television. And so the opportunity to literally open my mouth and with surprise, experience, you know, one of their voices or attitudes or, you know, looks coming out of me as Aunt Vi, that is so much fun. Truly, and it's more, I see more of the aunties and the collective, you know, archetype that is Aunt Vi more than I do like my specific mother, right? And then how Aunt Vi has evolved. I love that Ava DuVernay likes the truth. She seems, because we've not had this conversation, she and I, but she seems to be a person who is okay with the messy nature of life. She doesn't judge it. She just accepts that it's a part of the palette. And so I don't judge anything in particular as messy or good or whatever. It is life. Yeah. And Vi, you know, in season 4, she had to come face to face with the trauma and the abuse that she had found her way beyond, or at least she thought she had found her way beyond that. But season 4 let her know, and in letting her know, taught all of us that you don't really move beyond trauma. You don't really move beyond being triggered until you respect what has happened enough to truly look at it. And that's what season 4 was for Aunt Vi. And I just find it divine. That's the only word that comes to my mind. That in Tina Lifford's, you know, daily life, in Tina Lifford's passion outside of acting, because acting is truly my passion. But outside of acting, my equal passion is well-being work. And I just find it so interesting that with all of the wonderful actresses that are out here and in my peer group who could have been Aunt Vi, that I got to be here, and that I got to be here in a role that deals with truth and looking at it clearly. And then I got to be here during a pandemic when our emotions and our sense of self and our ideas about loss and all of that are all confronted and challenged. And I can only tell you that this experience leaves me in deep gratitude, because it feels like it is something that I can meaningfully contribute to, and also something that I can gain meaning from. And that's the best way to live life.
That's so beautiful.
I knew it was going to be good.
What?
That's so
I said I knew it was going to be good, Tina. I knew it was going to be good.
Yeah. And I get to meet people. I mean, I love this woman. And Aunt Vi loves Charlie.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would almost say, you'll have to address this, Dawn-Lyen, but I would almost say that the relationship that is experienced on the screen, the dynamic, is actually also replicated in our non-acting relationship.
I think it's actually the other way around. I feel like our relationship is replicated on screen. Like there's crossover. It lends itself to that relationship on screen. It informs it all the time. For me, it does all the time. My relationship with Tina, who I have adopted, whether she wants to be or not, as my aunt, so she is.
Yes.
And that is our relationship. It really is. I come to her for advice. She has counseled me through very big things in my life. It is the relationship. And so it has, it's, I guess, sort of started on screen because we were put into relationship that way in playing those characters, but our off-screen relationship, I feel like, has traveled far and deep and wide in a very similar way, and then informs what ends up on screen. For me, that's how it works. So I'm just, it is an extraordinary experience, this show, in how that actually happens all over the show. For me, it has happened all over the show. That's not always the case. That's not by virtue of we're actors and we can't distinguish our lives from the characters and we're just like absorbent, empathetic 5-year-olds. That's not the case. We're all professional adults. We all know who we are and who we aren't. But the reality is that I think, Tina, you're quite right, that because Ava is so invested in telling stories that speak to the truths of our lives, especially the cultural truths of our lives. And some of those cultural truths include relationships like auntie and nieces. Without a doubt, those have defined my life. So I know, I think in terms of Charlie in particular, every time that I do anything that's like an interview or something, it always lets me know where I am and where it's like the best opportunity to reflect on where we've been, because I'm thinking story and I'm thinking character and I'm thinking me. And I think in terms of character first, she is such a constant tribute to the complicated gray of women and the heroic complicated gray of women that is often unseen and often unacknowledged, diminished. And this show does none of that. This show 100% makes space for her and for her absolute drive to force the world to make space for her. And so in some ways, she's ahead. She's actually ahead. And she's impatient for the world to catch up to her, rightfully so. And she sees no reason to diminish herself. She only has a desire and a drive to embody more fully who she is. She has an incredible lack of a crisis of confidence. She has no crisis of confidence. And it's actually been a great gift and pleasure to play, because I think for me, I have not lived my life having no crisis of confidence. I've definitely lived my life with a fairly aware crisis of conscience, or been aware of one, of confidence. And I think in some ways embodying her, telling her story, which has been such an incredible arc to embody, I've stepped into a different kind of ownership of my skills, my capacity, my gifts, my talents, my dreams, my visions, and a different ability to ask, demand, force a space to make room for me. And it has been, I don't know if I would have without having played this role. It's sort of the gift of our profession, is that each role does, often for me, I have felt land in exactly the right time, in exactly the right space, and for exactly the right reason. And part of that has been, for me, acceptance of all that gray. And I think a lessening of the judging of that within myself, that I've put that down a bit in the past 4 years. And instead, I have learned and discovered just how powerful it is to include all parts of myself. Just how powerful it is to embrace the messy, and embrace the even the sometimes morally gray, and embrace that who we are is constantly unfolding and constantly evolving, and that's what she represents, a constant unfolding. That you think this woman, when we first meet her, has it all and is in complete, ownership, and is at the pinnacle of her life, only to watch it crash by the end of the first episode. And thus her journey begins. And we've watched her journey every single season move her into an entirely different realm, every single season. And that has been such an exciting thing to play, especially as I think her definition of herself has moved very far from the place that it began, which was about gaining for herself and achieving for herself, with that almost righteous drive of, because I say so, because I'm not going to agree to society's rules that I can't do this. No, I'm going to be in, professional basketball as a manager because I say so. That's just how that's going to go. And she's moved from that being, I think, a much more self-centered place, and even sort of immediately family-centered place, and defined, quite frankly, by her ex, who was that basketball player, defined by that, and moved into a space where her drive is actually about her family and her community, and for things and for visions much bigger, much broader than just her. She's living on purpose differently now. And to be able to tell that story, and to hopefully give permission, which is what I've heard about how Charlie is received for a lot of women, is this permission is granted to be the hero of their life, and to move through things perhaps imperfectly, but always toward the further expression of who they are, the fuller expression of who they are, the more assured and confident expression of who they are, and all of who they are, as contradictory and messy and uncomfortable as it can be for them or anyone else. And that has been just an absolute privilege.
These characters all have such incredible arcs and journeys that they go on, and it's such a pleasure to watch. But also, being a Black woman born and raised in Southern Louisiana, to see this family on screen is incredibly validating. And I see my own family. I see the women that I grew up around through these characters, and so it's It's a great thing to have on TV right now. I never would have thought that a show like this would exist when I was growing up. But outside of acting, you both do a lot. You both do a lot. And so I want to jump into that a little bit, starting with Tina. You are a spiritual teacher. You've written this book, The Little Book of Big Lies. And you have this concept of inner fitness that I'd really love to hear you speak about and define, and hopefully tell us how you achieve it.
Yeah. Well, first I will tell you that the work I do outside of acting is directly tied to acting. And that's because in the 5th grade, I had a debilitating experience with stage fright. So debilitating that literally I was supposed to be singing at the in front of the student body, and we got 4 bars in. I froze so completely that they literally had to come to stage and pick me up like a little cardboard, character and carry me off. And that experience, I forgot it, or I thought I forgot it. And then somewhere in my drive to create my career, it got triggered. And acting is the only thing that I ever wanted to do outside of the inner fitness work that I now do as well. And literally, there would be times that I would, get the call for an audition. And the moment that I heard my agent's voice, I'd go, which is the same, that I took, that gulp of fear that I took back, in the 5th grade before I went on stage, right? And because I am an authentic person, because I do show up walking my talk, and that I value that, I was very conflicted. I was very confused. How do I, walk in what feels like confidence in so many areas of my life, and then, over here, I find myself in, breakdown, or I find myself out of control of my body and my thinking. And that confusion became the gift of a lifetime, because I was determined to find answers. And I've always been a spiritually aware person. I came here an old soul, I am told by my parents. And I would go to church, and I'd sit there, and I'd feel the Holy Spirit. I would feel everything that the minister was putting down. He often said, "Are you picking up what I'm putting down?" And yes, I was. And yet, that did not that did not help me in the midst of a triggered experience. And so I was curious about how to get there. How do I take control of my life in the midst of triggered experiences, in the midst of old hurts, traumas, upsets, and disappointments running? And, when you really discover that life is divine, you can say yes to everything that comes into your life, because if you adopt the growth mindset, which says that the true reason that we are here is not, career or family, or anything else that you could come up with. The true reason that we are here with the gift of consciousness is to, within ourselves, expand ourselves beyond our limitations, so that more life, God, can move through us and pull our species forward. And that when we understand that our true purpose is to be a pathway for that experience, then we get to use everything that comes into our life in service to that ultimate mission, that ultimate purpose. And so that stage fright became the pain, the discomfort that sent me in a deep dive, you know, what's that saying that, you know, the rabbit hole of myself. And that has been a glorious journey. And in that rabbit hole, because I'm about the truth, I have been able to discover and find and realize and see things that were so powerful for me that I was now able to take those aha moments and that awareness and that expanding, see it and articulate it in ways that could be of service to others. So my book, The Little Book of Big Lies, it's the byproduct of all that I have been doing in the rabbit hole of Tina Lifford, and where, you know, I would go to church and leave and understand what he was saying, but not know exactly what to do to have ownership of it for myself. My book, at the back of each chapter, it is very specific about what it is that we all must be doing in order to rewrite our stories and to take our power back from the lies. You know, the Little Book of Big Lies says that anything that has ever happened in our lives that disconnected us from our sense of ourselves as innately whole, that thing is a lie. And we must see the lies that move into our lives and then actively, you know, with reliable tools, begin to deconstruct the lies so that the truth of who we are can come out. And so online now, the pandemic gave me the opportunity to literally fulfill the vision of having inner fitness be as familiar and accessible as physical fitness is. So you can go to a physical fitness gym and in an hour, you know, you tone your muscles and you support your physical wellness. Well, online, we, an hour at a time, we're delivering radical aha moments that change life for the better. And it is so fun and exciting to have people come into our workout and, you know, experience what we're doing and talking about and step into our exercises and practices. And literally 7 days later, 12, you know, 2 weeks later, have them share in ways that just say, I'm living my purpose.
There's no better time for inner fitness than now. And everywhere we look, we see people trying to approach wellness and to cope with, you know, Dawn-Lyen, you mentioned grief earlier and how so much of this year has just been surrounded by grief and exploration. And people have really had to sit with their thoughts. I think earlier, Tina, you said something about having to spend intentional time with yourself, which I think is difficult for so many people. So it's incredible to hear you speak about this, and I'm just so excited to dive into this book and all of these teachings, because it's something that we could all use right now. And Dawn-Lyen, I was also super excited to learn about your activism and the work that you've done around prison reform in California. Could you speak to some of that and why you sort of champion that particular cause?
Yeah. First of all, I love hearing Tina talk. This this is what I mean when like, I've been getting this for almost 5 years. It's like, you know, her pseudo niece. So I'm just grateful that, that indeed through her work, she is, more and more people are naming what she is naming. And so much of it lives in practice. So I'm just so grateful to hear her always. Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on my work in activism now. I think for the past 5 years, I've been in this process of integrating these worlds for myself. Before Queen Sugar, it often felt like I had just had two hats. You know, I lived in these two worlds, and not even just straight up activism, but more the social justice world that it manifested itself in all kinds of ways, primarily teaching artist work, you know, in underserved and under-resourced communities. And I was really on a track actually right as I was auditioning for Queen Sugar, of deciding whether or not I was gonna, you know, I was considering applying to grad school for more sort of accreditation in that work, to be able to legitimize certain efforts that I was a part of in terms of certain organizations I was looking to found and et cetera. And then when Queen Sugar happened and when I got that role, it was like, okay, well that's not where life is saying go forward this right now. This is where life is saying go forward. And then sort of stepping into a more public space, you know, being on the show and going from being an actor who's more of a workaday actor. I'm doing my thing. I'm making a living gratefully, and, you know, just sort of moving through other spaces in my life, almost anonymously. And that was sort of over. And now I was in a different realm that I needed to attend to and manage and be intentional about, which had to do with stepping into, you know, a more public space, a celebrity space, and et cetera. And that all came with its own sort of asks around activism and causes. And, you know, I think before about 10 years ago, activism wasn't as celebrity driven. There was sort of a shift that began to happen, and the hashtag woke started. And so I actually resisted sort of claiming space in that realm because I had actually been in it so seriously, and that I had, you know, my best friend was an organizer. I knew what that was, and that it was, I think, you know, I found it like a little trendy for people to be, all of a sudden, I'm a celebrity and I'm an activist, when the frontline work of being an activist is something entirely very different. It takes a different kind of investment, and a different kind of listening to community that celebrity doesn't necessarily give you time to do. So I, for the first couple of years, I was really thinking about how was I going to integrate these worlds and these identities that I held and still hold. And then I gratefully was invited into a space called Harness, which is a collective of artists and activists and organizers whose members work to center marginalized communities in pop culture. And they do this through numbers of ways, including their own work in Hollywood and storytelling, but also in very engaged work in the social justice realm. And so it's sort of this cross-section. I felt like I finally found my people. And from that, I began to create relationships and just build a different sort of vision for what my quote celebrity would look like. And so that led me to becoming quite good friends with Patrice Cullors, who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. And she and the efforts in LA, which were moving far before I was a part of them, for years and decades before I was a part of them, but they were making incredible headway with prison reform and jail reform, really, in Los Angeles. People don't often know this, but LA is actually the incarceration capital of the world. More people are incarcerated there than anywhere else in the world, in terms of the LA County jail system and the immigrant detention system. So that combination of incarceration is very defining of Los Angeles. It's also very invisible. So really being in Queen Sugar, stepping into this space, and also the storyline of the show was a part of my own awakening to what was happening in my own hometown, which is Los Angeles. I remember seeing at a library, season 1 in New Orleans, seeing that Louisiana was the incarceration capital of the world. And that was in 2016. I remember seeing that stat, just my whole brain was like, what? Like I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. And then over the course of the show, over the next season and the season after, where there was so much, not only a focus on police brutality, which was I think driven by Nova's storyline, and then Ralph Angel's story being a formerly convicted man, and move, like living how he's going to build his life and leave that behind, and how the world is or isn't going to let him do that or help him do that. And then Charlie's storyline in season 3 of preventing this prison being built in their community. It thread itself through, and of course it did, because our show creator Ava DuVernay, this is absolutely the land that she walks in, and the land that she is essentially, she's revolutionized how we talk about this in this country. It can't be overstated how true that is. She has. So it has, as I was moving through these storylines in the show, I was waking up to it in real life as well. I think that there are a fair number of us who, through Queen Sugar, through 13th, through a number of actual storytelling vehicles, came into more awareness, more contact with just how much incarceration has touched their lives. I was one. I began to see it like, oh, I just didn't think of myself as someone who's been touched by incarceration, but absolutely, like, I'm looking around at my family, I'm looking around at my neighborhood, and I just had normalized it, as you do, to survive. You normalize it, you internalize it, you make it okay, when the reality is the systems don't work, and they create incredible suffering, they create incredible pain. And so I began to, and being in community with Patrice through Harness, and like all these ways that just organically led me to, oh, I need to lend my platform, my person, my voice to this very real and incredibly impactful fight, because so goes Los Angeles when it comes to incarceration, because it is the incarceration capital of the world. Then you begin to truly turn the conversation around incarceration and incarceration in the country, potentially the world. So I understood that, I felt that, I knew that, I had intuited it, and then I began to live it. And that meant showing up in a very committed and embodied way to the Reform LA Jails campaign, which is what happened in the last year and a half. Reform LA Jails has, and many other organizations in Los Angeles, including Justice LA and a few others, have been incredibly successful at some incredible gains, including preventing a mental health jail, essentially, from being built, which I think to some people sounds like a good thing, but anyone who understands and is familiar with incarceration knows that incarceration and mental health do not go together. One does not create the other in a positive direction. It usually creates the other in a negative direction. So they stopped a giant facility from being built in Los Angeles, and in fact have put 2 measures on the ballots that have not only stopped that from being built, but have actually given voters in Los Angeles County an opportunity to express where they want to be going when it comes to jails and incarceration. And where that is alternatives to incarceration, and investing money, not in the police structure and in the carceral system, but into community, into practices, and into alternatives that have been proven to work. And so that's been a big passion of mine, but really it has been one part of what is now a larger effort that I've launched about a month ago in support of the election, called Belong. And that really is a public conversation around belonging in our public spaces. and really an invitation for folks to co-imagine what belonging can look like in our structures and in our public spaces. And we see elections as the bridge from protest to policy. And it really did emerge from this year. It emerged from the COVID rates in Black and Brown communities. It emerged from the protests that we saw sweeping the nation and waking people up to the realities of systemic racism. And it emerged in response to, I think when the election finally hit, this year had already been so ripe with pain and with complication. And there was really nowhere that I saw that was centering the conversation of political engagement in politics around belonging and around how we express our belonging, and as belonging as an inherent native need that we all have. And how are our structures and how is our society, how are our public spaces allowing us to belong or not? Claiming, how are we claiming our belonging or not? How are we in our voting for our belonging or not? So that effort has actually been the bigger expression of which we're from LA Jails, and my support for the transformation of and complete reformation of our carceral system. It's one part of this larger issue. And in fact, I'm so grateful and blessed and privileged that I was able to partner with, and Belong was able to partner with Own Your Vote for this last election cycle. And that was a powerful just expression. And part of what I think I've understood, and I'll wrap up because I know I've been talking for a little bit, but part of what I think I've understood in this year in particular, and part of what I think we've seen bear out with the election, is that, as a Black woman, and I think part of what Queen Sugar has also brought me into fuller awareness and ownership of it, but as a Black woman, my lens is very informed by the dynamics of othering and belonging, in that I think many Black women have an insight into what the fallout is of being othered so profoundly, what being excluded from access to power and to thriving and to justice and to not even just to the systems that allow us to thrive, but also to our own internal conversations, like what we need to confront and often have to confront to address our lives internally. And I think that's where Belong sits. It's related to Tina's work, actually, in terms of what inner conversations and what inner journeys does this work of asking questions around belonging force us or ask us or demand us to do, and how does that then ask us to look at our outer structures and demand differently from them? So that's really what I'm most excited about going forward, is that the election was election protection was phase one of Belong, and we have now sort of work beyond that has to do with content and community building. And to be a space really for people to meet the craving that I hear so much that people have, which is to unpack this experience of belonging in our political engagement.
Hearing both of your commitments to your work is so incredible, especially, these are things that need to be sustained over time. And so the vote is one thing, and you mentioned the Own Your Vote initiative, which I believe you were both a part of. That it encouraged, Black women to get out and vote, and we see the results of that. We're entering into a new presidency, thanks so much, to the Black women in this country who had that voting power. So this work is incredibly important, and it seems that it's in tandem to what you're doing in your careers as actors and what you're bringing into the show as well. And I touched on this earlier, but I really do want to bring it home that this show really advocates for Black women in so many ways, and that Black women are still pushing themselves into this industry. And it's incredible to see the writers and the directors that have been given opportunities for the first time. I think of the other few Black women filmmakers that I meet at festivals, and then suddenly I see that they're involved and they're directing a Queen Sugar episode, Bola Ogun, Chaiko Omoale, Shooter, Sierra Glaud, you know, all of these people, Felicia Pride in the writer's room. And so that sort of accessibility and very like radical inclusion, you know, that's a form of activism work in itself. How does that collaboration look like, and how do you, as actors and as team members, sort of support these up and coming directors? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I feel like we have, we have had a front row seat really to watching emerging directors, especially coming from film, really learning on our set, really learning about TV and TV production, but also being supported and shepherded, you know, into professional directing and television beyond Queen Sugar. Like, how many people have gone on to just thrive and just take the baton and run in so many other productions, Demaine Davis being one, even Garrett Bradley, who has said, oh my God, it just like, it's been such a joy to be that first family, I think, for a lot of the women who are coming onto our set. And it has really, for me, just redefined. I remember looking up director one day on the internet, just like wondering, what does Wikipedia say? Like, and the image is like, you know, of course, it's some like white dude, like gray hair with a camera. And I'm like, that's what this show has done. It's completely redefined that. It's taken that as an actor, as someone who's just, you know, been with woman after woman on this show, it's taken that and it's completely shattered it as the single definition of what that can look like. And I can't overstate how powerful and giant that is, how much that's affected me emotionally, and how just giant it's been. In the case of Shooter, Sierra Glaud, who was one of our directors, our 3 directors this season, that has been such a full circle experience of joy to have met her as our cast PA in season 1, and to know that her dream was to be directing and writing and to be at the helm, and to have watched her progress, and to watch her move from PA into the writing room, and then into you know, the other beautiful things she's been doing outside of even Queen Sugar, and then to come back and circle back and become a director this season. There's just no other experience except celebration and joy. And she's been, of course, stepping into it beautifully and wonderfully, and sort of like she's been doing this since she was in season 1. Like, she was always just directing. That's always what she's doing. So it has been just so satisfying to see that, and, you know, to be walking the walk of, we are committed to, and to feel that commitment, I should say, Ava is committed to completely transforming and shifting the norms of this industry, so that it isn't about exceptions. It isn't about aren't we a special show? It's about we're modeling what can be done, should be done. There's no excuse for it to not be done. And yeah, it's just been joyous, inspiring, and it has felt like a frontier that everyone else is caught up to, or is in the process of catching up to. And that's been amazing.
Yeah. Ditto, you know. I will say that one of the things that I am conscious of the reality that almost every director that steps on our stage floor has not yet had the opportunity of being a television director. And that's got to be an unnerving experience, no matter how excited you are, no matter how prepared even you think you are or not. It's got to be unnerving. And I think that one of the gifts that this show gives them is not just the opportunity to have that experience that can truly change their careers for the better, but they also have an experience of what working on a good, sane, healthy, collaborative stage and production can feel like.
Yeah.
And I think that how we all show up winds up being part of the bar, you know, either whether you get the experience, the emotional and community experience of a Queen Sugar going forward or not, you have at least had it. And if you find yourself in an environment that is more typical, you at least know it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so it doesn't have to be how it has been. And, you know, just listening to Dawn-Lyen share regarding this question, I was thinking that a really great exercise that should be taught, you know, at film school would be to research Queen Sugar and see how intention and a sense of possibility and a clear-cut vision of how you want to impact the world can actually become, you know, a way of stepping into the world and creating your own world. Because Ava has done that. You know, Ava knew that she wanted to open doors for female directors, you know, and for women of color. She knew that she wanted to elevate and share with the world Black family as she knew it. And she knew that she wanted people to be able to challenge the idea of what's possible. And Queen Sugar does all of that. So it's a pleasure. It's a joy, you know, to invite the new directors in, to applaud their talent, and then to see them on their journey beyond us.
Well, I know fans are super excited to continue watching. What can they look forward to from your characters in this upcoming season?
I'll go. Everybody, listen up. If you want to know what is coming, and it's really, really good, you're gonna have to watch the show.
Co-signing.
That'll do it. Dawn-Lyen, Tina, thank you so much. This has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you for being a part of New Orleans and being a part of the show, and gracing us on the screen. We're so thankful to have you here in good health and in good spirits. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Please continue to check out the festival for as long as it's running and the other panels. Thanks for joining.